Hello, my name's Paul Grogan and welcome to another Gaming Rules Review. In this video, I am going to be telling you what I think about Chicago 1875 City of the Big Shoulders, designed by Raymond Chandler III for 2 to 4 players. Takes about 2.5 hours according to the box, so you know that's not true, and was released by Parallel Games at Gen Con 2019. Now, what's a little bit confusing about this game is it's also being published by Quined Games with different artwork and a different name. The Quined Games version, I believe, is called Chicago 1875, subtitled City of the Big Shoulders. This is just City of the Big Shoulders. It's apparently exactly the same game, just with different name and different artwork, which I think is a little bit unusual. Anyway, this video has been created thanks to the support of my Patreon campaign. So thank you very much to all of my patrons who voted, and this was one of the games that you wanted me to review this month. So here I am, reviewing it. Now, caveat, I have only played this game twice. I normally like to play games a few times, but it is a little bit long. I mentioned that it says 2.5 hours on the box. Our first game took about 5 hours. It would probably take 2.5 once you all know what you're doing, but it can run a little bit long. Now, what is this game about? It's set, believe it or not, in Chicago, and it starts in the year 1875, and it takes place over 5 decades. There's 5 rounds in the game. Each round represents 10 years of time. And what you are going to be doing is you're going to be investing in the different companies, and there's lots of different companies available. I believe there's 10 different companies in the base game. You're going to be investing in them by buying shares, launching those companies, and then you're going to be operating those companies. So you're going to be buying raw materials, and then you're going to be using workers, which you will buy from the market. You will place them on here, or you might automate that factory, which means the worker gets another job working in a different factory. But basically, you'll be converting those raw materials into goods, which are these white tokens here. And then you will be exporting these goods to one of the relevant markets. This is a food company, so it will be exporting here. And you'll be basically placing these white markers onto the spaces there, and that will get you money. So the company makes money. And then what the company does is it pays the money out to its shareholders. And if you are a shareholder, which you are if you run the company, you will get some money. But you'll also get money if you've invested in other people's companies as well, because when they pay dividends, you will get some of that money. When a company pays out dividends, its share price goes up, which means it's going to be worth more at the end of the game. This is an economic game, and at the end of the game, you've got your money on hand and also the value of your shares. For those people who are familiar with 18xx style games, you may notice some similarities. This game has been described to me and by others as a cross between an 18xx game and Arkwright. Now, I have played some 18xx games. I'm not the world's biggest fan of 18xx. It's a game system that I respect. It's just not personally what I want to spend my time playing. And it's not that I have a problem with economic games. When this game was sold to me, I was like, oh, this is really cool because it plays in 2.5 hours. It's got the stocks and shares part of an 18xx game. It's got the running companies, the share price, the selling shares, dabbling in other people's companies. I really like that. I thought, yeah, I'm going to enjoy this game. I've not actually played Arkwright, so I can't comment on that. Now, the things that I like about the game. Well, first of all, it will scratch that itch that some people have of an 18xx game, but playable in 2.5, 3 hours maybe. As I say, our first game was 5, but more on that later. We were struggling with the rules. So it does, and it is a fixed amount of time. It's 5 rounds, so it's not going to drag on forever. And there's one bit of the game that I do actually quite like. One of the phases, I think it's phase 3. Basically, each player will have 3 building tiles in their hand. And on the first round of the game, you will each put a building tile onto your respective space. So if this were a 4-player game, there would be some extra tiles placed there, and then they all get revealed. And what you're doing is, because there was a great fire in Chicago in 1871, I think this thematically represents the fact that you're building up new buildings in this area. And phase 3 of each round is a worker placement phase. You've got 2 workers to start with, and you can get more as the game goes on. And basically, you place these workers onto the various spaces on the board. So there are some fixed ones that come by default, like here, where you get your workers, for example. But the other spaces are ones that the players have put on there. So you are influencing which spaces are available during the game. What's also interesting is some of these spaces, depending on the icon in the top left, the bank will pay you money. And when I say you, it's the owner of the building, or the company who goes there pays the player. So for example, if I decide to go on this space here, my company that I'm currently running, because you can have more than one company, my company will pay the green player $10 and we'll take that. Okay, so I quite like that. And as the game goes on, over 5 rounds, you will basically be placing more buildings on here. Round 3, you get an extra worker because there's going to be more spaces available. When I first played it, I felt this was a little out of place because I've played 18xx games before where there is the stock round where you buy and sell shares, and then there's the operating round where you basically run your companies. And this is something new. This is a completely new part of the game. And I felt, oh, it feels a little out of place, but on reflection, it's just a bit different and it does handle that quite well. That bit's quite nice. And the other thing that's good about the game is the components are pretty good. You know, the card stock is nice and thick. There's lots of stuff in here. And yeah, pretty much it's all okay. These counters are a little bit small, but they do have to fit on here. So yeah, components-wise, I've no problems with the components. Unfortunately, that's about it where the positives about the game for me end. I have lots of negative opinions about this game, which I am going to try and explain to you why I think they're negatives, why I don't particularly like them myself, in order to try and give you, an explanation of why the game didn't work for me. Because it has to be said, the people I've played this game with enjoyed it a lot more than me. Tom said it's one of his best games of the year so far, whereas my opinion, it's probably the worst game that I have played this year. So, different opinions, different things. So I'm going to try and explain what I didn't like about it. The first thing I'm going to talk about is the rulebook. Now, I mentioned our first game was 5 hours. Thank you very much to Graham Charlton for taking the time out for reading the rulebook and then teaching us all how to play on the Thursday night at HandyCon. Now, in Graham's words, some parts of this rulebook, I think he said, are absolutely just don't make any sense whatsoever. And he had to go online and get some answers from Board Game Geek. Thankfully, and thank you very much to the designer for being very active on Board Game Geek and answering people's questions. But there were definitely some parts of this rulebook which I've gone back and I've reread, and they make absolutely no sense whatsoever. We know what they're trying to say because we now know how the rule works because we've had answers on BGG, but the way that it's worded is just diabolical. Now, part of me feels a little guilty and bad, and some people will be critical of me because I write and edit rulebooks professionally. I know writing rulebooks is really hard to do, okay? And I'm not saying that the rulebooks I write are perfect. They're not, but rulebooks take a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of people looking at it. And unfortunately, this one, whilst it's big, but that's not a problem. And it looks like it's well laid out with lots of images and everything like that. So initial glance, it looks okay. But unfortunately, it fails in a lot of areas and you're gonna struggle. Unless you already know how to play the game, then you're gonna struggle with it. So I'm gonna give you some examples now. The game setup doesn't tell you about starting with a company. That's covered on page 12 after you've had 6 pages of front-loading information which isn't really needed and just confusing at the start. But those rules, do they tell you to place any remaining shares of the company that you start with in its treasury? No. That's not covered on page 12 under the rules about starting your first company, and it's not covered on page 14 under the procedure for starting a company. Where is it? Well, it's on the setup diagram on page 4, and it's also buried a little bit here. The cleanup phase doesn't actually tell you to progress the round marker. Now, I know this might sound I'm being really fussy, but actually it matters when you move the round marker because this number of cubes restocks the supply area and you need to know whether you're supposed to have moved the marker on before you do the restock. And it's just not mentioned in the rulebook at all. The play raids look really good and detailed, except they don't match the rules. The cleanup phase on the player aid doesn't match the rulebook. There's a whole step missing, and they're in a different order. The player aid says that you shift and refill capital assets at the end of your turn. This is wrong. You don't. You shift and refill the supply chain cubes instead. Then there are the advanced rules, which aren't really in the rulebook, but they're on a separate card sheet instead. Except one of the things on the advanced rule sheet, which is here, which happens when a company sells out of stock, is actually mentioned in the rulebook as a basic rule, although it's sort of tucked away on page 10, so you can't really find it. But it is there in the basic rules, but it's on the advanced rule sheet. So which is it? Is it a basic rule or is it an advanced rule? I don't know. The certificate limit that players have is printed on the bank pool space here, but as soon as you start selling company shares into the bank pool, it covers it over so you can no longer see it. So why print it there? That just seems really, really odd. The manager icons and the salesperson icons, you're looking at them here, and there's two of them next to each other, so you can clearly see that the lighter one is the manager and the darker one is the salesperson. But when you see those icons on their own on a card, it's really difficult to tell which is which. The black cubes and the brown cubes, brown is just way too dark. I mean, that's probably a production issue rather than a rulebook issue. I'm sort of diving into graphic design things here, but that caused us problems during our first game. Couple of things about these tracks. This is the share price track, which is how much a company is worth. And I know I'm going to be really fussy here, but why have you got it going up in a downwards direction? Because intuitively, your share price goes up. Therefore, the counter should go up. This track should be the other way around. It seems silly. Also, there's an appeal track over here. And again, you've got it advancing downwards, which just seems really unusual. I think these two tracks should be the other way around so that when a share price goes up, it actually goes up. What's worse though, is you have a few times in various places, you have these blue arrows and these red arrows. Well, what does that mean? Well, the blue arrow means that the share price goes up. Okay, so why is it a blue arrow pointing to the right when you have a share track that goes up and down? So this bit is just really weird. What's even weirder about this bit, and we had to laugh about this, is there's a thing here that says shares in bank pool, and there's this arrow here. This arrow, this icon is not explained anywhere in the rulebook whatsoever, and we had to have a really good think and a scour of the rulebook of what this means. What does it mean? Believe it or not, this is a rule that is printed on the game board for a rule which is not in the game. This rule does not exist in the game. It's telling you something doesn't happen. And why would it do this? And it's because this game has a lot of similarities to 18xx games, and in a lot of 18xx games, shares in the bank pool will affect the share price. So what they've done is they've printed it on the board to tell you, 18xx players, shares in the bank pool don't affect the share price. It's just baffling to print something on the board for a rule that doesn't actually exist in the game and just confuses all of us. One of the oddest things that I've ever seen in a rulebook is the rulebook actually saying, don't use the paper money that we've provided, only use it as a last resort, go and get some poker chips. And I totally get the point of this, because 18xx players will not use paper money and they'll all have their own set of poker chips, but it's just really weird to see this written in a rulebook. Under capital investments, it doesn't actually tell you how to use them. It kind of infers that a company exhausts them, but it doesn't say how you exhaust them or how you could do that. In the cleanup phase, what happens to the tiles with an X on them? Is it mentioned in the cleanup phase? No, it's not mentioned in the cleanup phase. Where is it? It's mentioned in the setup rules on page 6. Just baffling. As I say, rulebook, massive issues with it because rules aren't where you think they should be. They are buried and hidden in other places. I could go on, and you've probably switched off already because Paul's just, ranting about all the bad graphic design choices and the iconography and everything else, and the fact that the player aids don't match the rulebook. Yeah, Paul is going on about that because I've played so many games this year where this isn't a problem. So I am going to point it out, and I could point out more if I wanted to, but you get the general idea. This game needed, I believe, it needed more eyes looking at it. It needed a bit more, love and attention during the production process to make sure things actually worked and things looked correctly. Putting all of that aside, gameplay-wise, I was quite disappointed by the gameplay. Now, I went into it expecting that there would be some really interesting decisions and some really, crunchy economic stuff, stocks and shares, buying, selling, wheeling and dealing and things like that. Now, what happens in a lot of 18xx games, and certainly the ones that I'm used to, when you run your company, you have a choice of whether you pay out dividends or not. And if you don't pay out dividends, your company will withhold that money, but your share price will drop. Or in this case, it will go up on the track. In other words, it will go down. But if you pay out dividends, the shareholders get the money, they're happy, and the stock price goes up. And it's a difficult balance of what you want to do, because the company will need money to buy trains because they will be going obsolete and everything else. Now in this game, there aren't trains. Nothing goes obsolete. The stuff that you buy, the capital investments that you buy for your company, the workers that you hire for your company stay there permanently for 50 years. The only thing that doesn't go is the raw materials, which you have to buy every turn. But other than that, the managers, the salespeople, all of the stuff that you buy for your company is making it better. And nothing goes obsolete, which means the company just continues to grow and get better and earn more money each time, and the appeal goes up, and it just gets better and better. Now, what that means is that you don't actually need that much money once you've done those initial investments and you've bought those initial things to carry on operating, apart from to buy a few cubies each turn. But here's the thing. Because of this game, whenever you start a new company, any shares, so you start a company with 30%, you get the 30% share. The other 70% shares go in the company itself. So when you pay dividends, let's say I've just operated Libby for the first round and I've made $100. So I decide to pay it out as dividends. That's $10 per share. I have 30%, so I get $30. The company gets the remaining $70. So there you go. The company has just made $70 worth of money. Oh, and the price will go up by 2 steps because I raised twice 50. So it'll go up by 2 steps. So the shares are now worth 80. So why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you pay out dividends? Because the share price has just gone up, which means these are more valuable, and the company has just made 70. Or you could withhold the money, the company would make 100, okay, 30 more, share price would drop. What I'm saying is, the game gives you that choice. In all the games that I've seen, and that's been 3 of them, and in the games that I've spoken to other people about, every single company for the entire game has constantly paid out dividends. And that's disappointing because it just means everybody's just building a company, making the company better, running the company, paying out dividends, and the company price goes up. Nothing goes obsolete, so you're just constantly making it better. That's it. It just doesn't feel that the decisions are there on what to do. It's like the game could have done without that rule and said, look, you pay out dividends and the price goes up. Just have that as the default rule. I'm sure somebody might write in and say, oh no, once I withheld money. But as I say, it seems completely pointless to give people that choice. So yeah, I felt that was a bit of a non-decision. The other thing as well is, I quite like the fact that there's 4 different markets. So you might think, oh, Paul started Libby, McNeil and Libby, and he's managed to do this, and then he's gone on here and he's automated and he's done something else. And oh, wow, the company's off to a great start because he's made the right decisions and he's done the right thing. So it's off to a great start. So the share price has gone up. So I'm better off. I've paid out more money. So the company's better off and it's in a really good position. And people think, oh, right, well, I'll try and buy some shares in that. Or what they might do is they might say, oh, well, I'm going to compete. I'm going to compete on that market. Because the way this works, and I didn't mention this as a positive, but this is actually quite a nice thing in the way that these things work. You supply from this end to this end, and basically you can only supply as long as the spaces are there. So if you have multiple companies that are both competing for the same market, it's whoever will operate first, which is based on the appeal, will get to sell. The downside being, because there are a number of ways of increasing appeal, once you're a few rounds in, Libby, McNeil and Libby is probably running at maybe appeal 5 or maybe 4 even, right? So a new company comes along, Crackerjack, for example, that starts at 1. So straight away, it starts in at 1 and it's operating after Libby. So any attempt that you had of competing with Libby for selling stuff, you're not going to be able to because Libby's already an established company, the appeal is already there, excuse me, and Libby will be able to ship first. So it's very, very difficult to compete. Yeah, as I say, the whole way that a company just keeps getting better and keeps running, I'm not seeing it. Now, as I say, this is my personal opinion on the game. I've got friends who've played this game and they really like it and they say it's really interesting because you've got to look at which companies are doing well and buy shares in those companies. I'm clearly missing something because I look at a company, it's doing well, I'll buy some shares in it. That doesn't seem like much of a decision to make. But as I say, I'm clearly not getting this at all. But I've played it twice. And unfortunately for me, it's not just the fact that there's graphic design issues, the rulebook's a mess, and it's just frustrating to have to go through so much effort to learn a game when more effort could have been put in to make that process easier. But for me, if the gameplay was good and I really liked the gameplay, which I was hoping I would do, and I was really expecting to be honest, then I would not quite forgive all those things, but I would be able to move past them because I think I now know how to play the game. But yeah, for me, the gameplay was just not there. All I hope is that the things that I have told you about this game have helped you make an informed decision about whether you will like it or not yourself. And as I say, if you like it, great, that's fine. You carry on going and playing it. And if you don't like it, that's also fine. You know, there's no right and wrong here. It's just trying to find the right kind of game for you. And this is not for me. I tried, I really wanted to like it, and unfortunately I couldn't. So there we go. Thanks again to all of my Patreon supporters for making this review possible. I may have lost some of them after doing this review, I don't know. But anyway, thank you very much for everybody for watching. Thank you very much for all of the comments and everything in advance. And until next time, take care and thanks for watching. Gaming Rules is proudly sponsored by Game Toppers, upgrading your gaming experience. Visit GameToppersLLC.com.